So let's get this started. I played in a local tournament on Saturday, and it's a tournament I've done before. It's an interesting time format where it's 4 games all on the same day, and each game is 45 minutes per side with a 5-second delay. So it's not strictly true classical, but it is nice because you do get so much chess done. In a day, and it's nice. I am still provisionally rated. So in the United States Chess Federation formatting, once you play 24 games over the board, then you get your rating like actually rated. And until then, it's provisional. So this represents games 13, 14, 15, and 16 on my way to 24. And my rating is not what I hope it will be, but I have had quite the adjustment to playing over the board. So going into this tournament, I was rated 921. I played in the under 1400 bracket instead of the under 1000 bracket. So my first game was against a kid named Sebastian, and he was probably 13 or so, and I think he's new to over the board chess because there were a couple things during our game or as our game was concluding that I know is not really the way things go. Like, I became low on time in this game, and I stopped writing my moves down when I had less than 5 minutes. And he asked me, he was like, "Why aren't you writing your moves down?" And I had to tell him, and I was like, "I wish you could ask me this on your clock because you don't have this time control issue, but that's fine." But I started my game as white, which I was excited about because in general I had performed pretty well with white playing Queen's Gambit. So opening d4, and then Sebastian immediately threw me off with f5. It's theory, it's book, and I think I did in the moment recognize that it was the Dutch defense. But do I know any theory of the Dutch defense? No. So from this point forward in my opening, I'm not going on theory, I'm going just on opening principles. And I was like, well, yeah, we'll just keep doing what I would have done. So we go c4, Dutch defense e6, and then bringing a knight out. I don't know what I'm doing. They pin the knight. I bring another knight out. I think best move is actually to prepare to fianchetto the bishop because of this structure right here. This diagonal is very beautiful. Very, very beautiful. Yeah, prof, you are correct. Preparing the fianchetto here. So that's something where if I encounter the Dutch again, I will fianchetto. During the game, I did see it as an option with this really beautiful diagonal, but I wasn't, like I said, I don't know this line, I don't know this theory, so I didn't know if fianchettoing allowed black to have a strong counter here. So I figured I would play normally, and it worked out okay for me. So Sebastian brought his knight out. I'm pinning it, and actually here in analysis afterwards, I realized this is not the best move. It's an okay move, but there's a better move. The better move is bishop a3. Bishop a3 cuts off black's castling ability for this move, so they have to account for it. And it puts the bishop on a much better diagonal where it can't get kicked right away. Yeah, they could respond with something like d6, and I think that is the follow-up move. But given the Dutch defense with this pawn chain, pushing d6 here weakens the pawn chain, and because of the pawn here on c5, it gives me some pretty strong attacks. But I didn't do that. I went bishop g5, pinning the knight to the queen, and he castles. I was a little surprised by this because of the pawn structure, but his king is still relatively safe. You like bishop g4, Amuser? Bishop g4 is a good move. It just wasn't the best move. And I would have had a slight advantage if I had played bishop a3 instead. So me, I'm just developing normally. I do at this point clock that Sebastian has not developed all his pieces. So I am hoping to be able to capitalize on that because I'm nearly done developing. And Prof, the Dutch has a worse light squared bishop than the French. Yeah, the only option for this bishop is the fianchetto, which gives it a beautiful diagonal. And I think that's what ends up happening. Yeah. So Sebastian prepares to fianchetto. I put my bishop on d3, which is best move. Although I didn't know where I wanted my bishop, I just this was going on vibes, if I'm being honest. So yes, Sebastian develops his bishop, and I castle. And at this point, I realized that he's still not finished developing, and I have some pretty good initiative ideas here, right? I have access to a semi-open file. Let's try that again. Semi-open file. My pieces are well placed. My king feels a lot safer than Black's king. But you can see the eval bar, it is still 50-50 equal, right? Sebastian at this point realized he was playing no 900. Well, spoiler alert, I was not playing any 1242, let me tell you that. Sebastian played very, very, very well. He ended up winning the division. And I'll tell you the scores afterwards. So from here, Sebastian begins to kick out my bishop, and I decide to retreat to h4 instead of going to f4 with my bishop, because his pawns, if he were to continue chasing my bishop, would be so overextended that it would be worth it to me to take that extra tempo from my bishop. But he doesn't do that. He moves his queen to unpin his knight. So his knight will eventually have some flexibility. And I move my knight back. Why did I do this? I don't 100% remember, if I'm being honest. But I think the rationale was this square, if we go back, this square is really well defended by the pawn. My knight is not going to have any forward progress there. And sort of similar here, where it's not an outpost. So bringing my knight back, potentially to defend a pawn here, maybe to reroute this way, it felt like a better option. But that kind of went out the door after this move, because Sebastian is making a huge threat if I ignore it here, right? Because of the bishop and queen. And I spent a long time on this move deciding between bishop to g3, which blocks the attack, and Mullins, that was the other move I considered, is f3. And Engine thinks f3 is best move here. I ultimately decided to go bishop f3 because my bishop was undefended on h4. This does potentially have a threat associated with it. And in my mind at the time, I thought that f3 just weakened my position a little, although that's not the case. The case is I'm going to make that move anyway because Sebastian's threats are going to continue coming in accuracy. But I realized at this point that I had to make the f3 move to stop the mate threat on g2 because my bishop was stuck here. My bishop could not move from this square, otherwise the mate is back on the board. So f3 happened. It also allows my bishop an escape square, if necessary, to go here or here. My opponent is all over me. Excuse me, Blizzard. Look at this eval bar, still technically in my favor. And even though my king is in a kind of funky castle right now, Black's king, not safe. Also, Sebastian still hasn't finished developing. So I was slowly, I was trying to be very patient here, just making my position better, making Sebastian work for me, not the other way around. And in this move, he had to account for the fact that c7 was hanging. So he did. He starts to push in the center. And I line up for an attack with the developing move with my queen, with ideas to attack in the center. Sebastian moves his knight, I'm assuming, to try to reroute it somewhere here. Maybe attacking here, I'm not quite sure. But I make my attack. I attack because, in general, if the principle I was operating under in this was when your opponent hasn't finished developing, attack with initiative. So that's what I was doing, because this rook, not in the game. This knight, not in the game. Pretty strong bishop, pretty strong queen, but that's all he's got going for him. So he finally is like, oh, I need to finish developing. But it's too late. My attack is on target. He has to deal with it. And now I have this beautiful battery lined up with a pin on the queen. E4 is a desired break in the Dutch. Prof, is it desired for white or is it desired for black? I'm curious, because I don't play against the Dutch very often. All right, and at this point, you would play d5 here. Mullins, your pawn work is on point today. D5, oh wait, actually no, I take that back. Your pawn work is okay, but I think Engine recommends c5 here. Yeah. Prof, okay, thank you for that. So yeah, I was feeling pretty good. Look, the eval bar agrees that my position is decent to here. And from this point forward, I make an inaccuracy. I did see this maneuver. I saw c5 to try to chip away at the pawns. Hello, WW. Good morning, evening to you as well. And I didn't see the compensation positionally for the pawn. And Mullins, yes, that is the reason I didn't move d5 in the game, is d5 is doing a phenomenally important job of keeping the knight out. And so even though it would have been nice to take space and block the bishop, keeping the knight out was way more important. So yeah, c5 was best move here. Moving this rook here, it was okay, but it wasn't the best. And so what does Sebastian do next? He moves the queen forward to unpin his pawn. And look, I'm not a perfect player. I decide to try to line up my rooks because I do have control over the open file right now. Amuser, that's really well articulated. c5 activates the dark squared bishop, which is no longer being threatened, it's no longer a mate issue guarding g2. So yes, get my bishop in the game. Right now it has nowhere it can go to. So another reason I moved my rook was to give my bishop a little bit more breathing room if necessary. And Sebastian pushes his pawn, trying to continue his attack on kingside. And I made an inaccuracy here. I actually really like the engine's line, which I'll show in a minute. But I went all the way back to e1 with my bishop. I didn't need to do that. Best move is actually here. And the reason I didn't make this move was I thought that it made g2 a vulnerability again. Whereas with my move, with bishop being on e1, the rook can protect g2, which I liked a little bit more. But in the line, let me see here. Yes, let's explore the line. So in the line from the engine with the bishop on f2, Black pushes the pawn, and you push the pawn in front, so the pawn's forward progress stops. The queen moves, and then your rook comes up. And this was an exploration from me, but the rook comes up, so it's threatening immediately a couple things, and also makes it much more easier to coordinate pieces. And so I was like, okay, well, isn't this pawn technically hanging here? But it's not, because if they do decide to take here, you take back. And even if they take with the queen with a huge, huge mate in one threat here, move the bishop, and now g2 is covered by the queen with the discovered attack on black's queen. So I didn't see this in the game, but I really liked this idea. So I did make a note of it in my game here, and I wanted to show you. So actual game moves here. Went to e1 with my bishop. Sebastian did push the pawn again, and I decided, well, okay, that pawn isn't attacking my bishop anymore, so I move back. And then if he takes the pawn, I've got a couple ways to recapture it, one of which I ended up doing. He takes, and I take with the rook, which isn't, or it is best move, my apologies. And my idea here is obviously a tactical idea of a discovered attack on the queen. Now he can play f4. He could play f4, but that's not a problem for me for a couple reasons, I don't think. For example, if f4 is played here, I can take, or I can take here, right? And the lineup of pieces means that this knight is hanging. And then back if he doesn't take. Here, I see what you're saying. So if he had pushed this way, the same idea happens here, and because it's with check, it's a tempo, right? And then after the king moves, I could just slide my bishop out of the way. Actually, not there, because that would lead to mate. Slide my bishop out of the way, and be okay. Be okay. So where were we? We were here. I moved the rook, lining it up. Then, yeah, I got mated. So he moves the queen out of the way to remove the discovered attack. And I move my rook back to the open file. And you can see the game here is still relatively equal, slightly in my favor. And my next move is an inaccuracy. I try to infiltrate black's side of the board by attacking the queen, but it's a one move threat. It doesn't really do anything because the queen can move, and now these pieces are pretty well coordinated. And then I ran out of time. Then I ran out of time. Yeah. Yeah. There were some more moves after this. And if the review pane is, we both played with 88% accuracy, and eval was just about equal at the end. But Sebastian was playing really well. It was my first over the board game in quite some time. So I was really thinking through my moves, trying to make sure I didn't blunder. And although I did that successfully, I did not blunder once in this game. In fact, I didn't have any mistakes in this game. I had a couple inaccuracies, but there were inaccuracies that I at least accounted for. Yeah, 45 minutes did go very quickly. And, you know, after this game, I wasn't mad about it because I looked at the accuracy before the next round started and I said, okay, this kid, 1200 rated, I held my own very, very well. I liked how I played. I liked my ideas. I just needed to be quicker on the time. And it beats child. In fact, this child went on to get 4 out of 4 points in this tournament. He annihilated the under 1400 division. And I didn't realize this when I played him, but he was provisionally rated. I don't know how many games he had played in USCF, but I'm kind of wondering if he has a FIDE rating and is new to USCF, because no, that doesn't make sense because of the questions he was asking at the tournament. But it was clear he had skill, and yes, I didn't win the first game, but I was happy with it.